Welcome, greetings to everyone from Bonn, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this Global Media Forum session on culture, arts, and COVID and African voices on the global pandemic. As Liz has so nicely said before, we're all very well aware all over the world, not just here in Europe, that culture is one of the sectors that's been hardest hit by COVID-19. And in this session, we do want to look a little bit, although it's a very tall order, obviously, we want to look a little bit more closely at the situation of artists on the African continent. How has COVID-19 affected their artistic practice, their artistic distribution, possibly? How are they dealing with this tremendous disruption in their art systems and markets? And how might we make and actually take inspiration from their creative thinking? So joining us today is Akinbode Akinbiyi, and he's on the line with us now. Welcome, Akinbode. It's so great to see you again. For the benefit of our audience, Akinbode is one of Africa's best-known photographers. He's a British-Nigerian. He's a self-professed wanderer between cultures. And he's also a recipient of Germany's prestigious Goethe Medal back in 2016. And many of you may have heard of him before because he works and exhibits all over the globe. About 30 years ago, he moved to Berlin, where he's been based for the past 3 decades. But most of the time, you can find him walking the streets of an African capital somewhere, whether it be Bamako, Cairo, Dakar, or Johannesburg. And he has a very particular way of working with an old Rolleiflex camera, and he has a very particular pace that he likes to adopt. So let's have a short look at this just to get a feel for how it is that he engages with his environment.
I try to be as open and as free of cares as possible, at the same time very relaxed. So a particular moment comes together. I'm very concerned with the surface reality, what we see on the surface, at the same time, what is underneath? So the layers, the many, many layers. There's so many different realities. It depends where you're coming from, how you want to look at it, what age you are, how mature you are, all these things all the time. And in my own perspective, no one reality is above the other. In photography, in our perception of reality, we only get fragments. So it's a constant quest to try and get as close as possible to reality. Yeah, it's an ongoing learning adventure. I think it's very, very important, but I would never ever say that I've really got there. So I keep on trying all the time.
Akinbode Akinbiyi, there you are. Welcome. It's so great to see you. And he's joining us today from the Cape Verde Islands, where he's on another learning adventure. Akinbode, perhaps you can just tell us quickly what it is that you're doing there.
Nice to see you again, Karin. I'm here since yesterday afternoon. It was quite a exciting moment of landing because there was a very strong headwind. But the pilots really took us in and landed well. And then all the passengers broke out in clapping. So I'm here to do a 3-week masterclass with young, aspiring photographers from Portuguese-speaking countries in West Africa. In Africa, not just in West Africa. Yeah.
So from the
Angola,
Mozambique.
Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde Islands.
Exactly, from the Lusophone countries. Thanks very much, Akinbode. You've got a long flight behind you, so don't worry about that. Let's go back to early 2020, to when the lockdowns were first imposed upon us here in Germany. And as a photographer, of course, I'm assuming you're very used to working in isolation. And yet, I'm wondering how you have navigated this intense period of disruption, given that your terrain was so fundamentally changed?
It was a moment of radical change. And I liked what you just said, that I especially work in isolation, but now I was even like a kind of super isolation. So then I just went out on the streets still, initially without a mask, later on with a mask, of course, because we had to do it even outside, and making photographs. And these times, many times of empty spaces, empty streets. But then I noticed I was seeing more.
You mentioned the masks, and I'm just thinking that's obviously an incredibly new element for you. How you have a particular way of connecting, did that have a great effect on how you actually perceive the people and the world around you?
The mask, they actually mask people. So I could not initially read them well, but then of course you concentrate on other aspects of the physical body. Their eyes, which were not masked, their hair, their body features. And then what I didn't like, I still don't really like, is making images of people wearing masks. Because then it's a dated image.
It dates
in this particular time frame.
Exactly,
Yeah.
I understand that, and yet I'm sort of wondering. Obviously, one of the main themes of yours is cities, and these cities have been radically changed by COVID, especially during the lockdown period. Are we going to see this reflected in your work? Has it been reflected in your work?
In part, it has been reflected because I literally photograph every day, and yeah, it has been a change. But then just last weekend in Berlin, and with the beginning of the European Football Championships, crowds were back on the streets again, in front of flat screens at restaurants looking at the game. Some wearing masks, many not wearing masks. So you see, it's back to the so-called normal.
The past normal, no longer the new normal. Well, it's interesting that you've been able to keep working. You're very well connected in the arts scene in Africa, and although I understand the challenge of my next question, because Africa obviously is such a vast landscape, we're talking about 54 countries with very different capacities, very different constraints. Tell us perhaps, if you can, what are you hearing from your colleagues and fellow artists about how the pandemic has affected them?
For many, it was a very difficult time. No more income. Sometimes it was a complete 100% break. No more money coming in. So there were a few initiatives to help, how can you say it, disabled artists. In Lagos, for example, Oche Akwa started a kind of money, how do you say, so trying to subsidize photographers, artists who are not making a sustainable life. So there have been initiatives in different countries, but in many cases it's literally everybody looking out for himself or herself.
So essentially, creative practice has been on hold for many because they've simply been dealing with making ends meet. I'm assuming, obviously, that for most of the countries that you are most familiar with, also that the arts and culture are really arts and culture itself is taking place in what we call the informal sector.
You're right about that. Very much informal. There is very little national or governmental support. Mm-hmm. But I mean, artists are supposed to be creative, and some really find ways of moving ahead.
Can you comment, Akinbode, on the emotional impact of this standstill? What does it mean for artists to be deprived of this exchange and these vital connections that automatically and logically feed into their work?
It can be very, very disabling, disarming, especially for artists who rely on a public, mm-hmm. So musicians, actors, people like this. What I have heard, though, is that, as I said again, people do try and help themselves. help each other, and they try to move forward.
Indeed, there is evidence that a number of collectivities have been springing up across many African countries, South Africa being one of them. Obviously, the economic impact of COVID, though, has been huge with regard to the arts because, of course, as here in Europe, art venues have been closed, tours, exhibitions, workshops, your own classes often cancelled. So let's see how some other artists have been affected, particularly some in the music industry.
This corona has really affected me as an artist because I had shows, I had tours in the US, I had tours in Europe. I had to go to London to be with my family for a while and all those things couldn't come on because of corona, and because of the lockdown we had to be inside and stay safe.
Right now is the time to plan. For example, like us, musically, being artists, we've been able to move online. Everything now is online, everything digital.
I think we haven't had a chance to really sit down and introspect and think for our business differently, get new ideas. It's been a very interesting time for for us to think, to read.
We were rushing. Everything was in a rush.
The world was in a marathon, and I think it needed to slow down a little bit for us to be able to find ourselves.
Singing and not being able to sing anymore, it does affect you in a way because this is something you did every day. This is something that's a calling, and it's something that gives you life. Not being able to go on stages and also meeting people and just having a good time with people, it really does affect you psychologically in a negative way.
Corona, 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 corona. Why, corona?
Other guys there from Just Six, the a cappella group in Johannesburg, obviously doing their best to keep their sense of humor, but it's very clear, obviously, with singing in particular, how painful this kind of a gap has been. Akinbode, I want to come back to you with this question from what you know, or perhaps from also from your teaching, because you're involved and in touch with so many other artists. Would you say that there have been tangible changes in the artistic or media practice of many artists in Africa under these pandemic conditions?
Tangible differences, I would say no, but the artists themselves are maturing all the time. Mm-hmm. So those already well into their arts continue, and the younger generation just learn from us older ones, so such that actually there is a continuum, a growth. The pandemic was a kind of like a, how can I call it, a kind of disturbance, disruption. But now, hopefully, we're coming out of it, and then a very strong urge to move forward. I think I want to stress this point. We all want to move forward.
Moving forward, yes, obviously, and many have chosen the digital space to do that. It's been a savior for so many, as we also heard there in the report. But not everything can be transported there. You yourself are not really very active in the digital space. What are your thoughts on those developments?
Well, I'm not very active on the digital space, I will agree, but I do keep an eye on what's happening. There's a lot happening, especially with Instagram, but other platforms. Mm-hmm. And I think these are ways which the younger generation especially are constantly experimenting, trying out, and they will definitely find their ways. We, the so-called golden oldies, or the older ones, we learn from them. So it's a constant learning process. Again, I really want to stress this. It's a process in which we all, fortunately, hopefully, move forward.
It's interesting because one of the things that you stress very often in your work is these parallel existing many realities. And from a European perspective, COVID-19 acted in a way as something of a unifier because, of course, it brought societies to a standstill all over the globe. So from our perspective, everything was stopped. But can you perhaps just take us out of that Eurocentric view for a moment and tell us how it was perceived generally in many places in Africa?
Again, the wearing of masks, the exhortation, social distancing, be careful, wash your hands, hygiene. But in many parts of Africa, this was already the case, especially hygienic, not the wearing of masks, but washing hands, keeping clean. Please notice many places don't have constant running water. So how do they maintain this hygiene? So there are other ways as well. And most people, especially, of course, women, mothers, try to maintain a more or less healthy standard. And then, as said, you are right, it was a unifying factor. But for many, many peoples on the continent, it's still an everyday thing. You have to live from day to day. So you have to go out, you have to work to the marketplace, schools, and so on. So these have been tough times, but then tomorrow comes around.
Exactly. Tomorrow does come around and things, of course, are picking up. You yourself are part of the curatorial team for the African Biennial of Photography. That's called the 13th, the 13e Rencontre de Bamako in Mali. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're looking forward to this year.
Karin, a beautiful question, because I really love Bamako. I love the Rencontre. I've been going there since 2001, either as a participant, as a co-curator, or just as a visitor. It's a beautiful experience, and I think it's the leading, or I will claim it to be the leading African biennial, photographic biennial on the continent.
Now,
a very close friend of mine, Bonaventure Indikum, is the curator for this year again, and we have a very good team, and we're really working on it.
Where does the funding come from that? You told me that it was going to be a little bit smaller this year than it usually would, obviously because funding is slightly reduced. Where does funding come from for something like that, for instance?
In the years in the past, it came very much from Europe, from France, from the European Union. But now they've given it over to the Malian government, Bamako is the capital of Mali, to actually be the prime funder. The Malian government of itself doesn't have a lot of money, but they do try. But we try to source money from other funders as well. So, for example, the Moroccan Airlines also give some kind of support. Other funders as well are involved. But it's a tough situation. So one of the main things on the continent, which are so important, health, education, infrastructure, more funding goes into that, of course. But culture is equally important. So I'm calling out all the politicians, all the leaders, please don't forget us.
Well, that's interesting. That was, of course, my next question, because obviously here in Europe, things are improving, things are relaxing as the vaccine rollout takes off. Things in Africa are comparatively slow in that respect and really just starting to pick up. I'm wondering if you can just tell me sort of in generally with this question of the importance of the arts, how important are artistic voices to for the wider public perception of what's really going on the ground in Africa?
Artistic voices are crucial. We, and it's not just the photographers, but it's primarily writers, musicians, they have so much to say. The people themselves listen to them. Again, now, the leaders, the politicians, sometimes they listen as well, but they don't like what they're hearing. And this is not as if artists are clowns, laughing at those in power. No, they're really saying it as it is. So I really do wish not just the people listen, but also the politicians, the administrative people, the leaders, that they too listen.
You're in touch with so many younger artists through the fact that you give these masterclasses, for instance, that you'll be doing for the next few weeks. How has the pandemic affected them, and do they make you hopeful with their views of how this will pan out?
they are such a wonderful source of hope, Karin. Beautiful sources of hope. They bring actually this dynamic and vitality onto the what do you call it, onto the table.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's where I think the future definitely lies. There's a beautiful saying in Ghana: "The young shall grow," and this is an everyday thing. So that yesterday somebody was just 1 year old. Tomorrow he's 10, 15, 20, 30. They come on board. And unfortunately, again, many of our leaders forget this, which is a shame.
I just want to ask you one more thing, Akinbode, because I know that one of your maxims is we should never stop learning. What do you hope we can learn from this pandemic in terms of inspiration as human beings? We've heard a lot today about the need for collaboration, the need to kind of find our collective humanity. What are you hoping we can learn, or are you optimistic that we can learn something key from this recent crisis?
I think one of the biggest keys to learn is our relationship to nature. We really have to respect nature, stop misusing it, abusing it, and then especially the so-called animal world, the bird world. I mean, apparently corona comes a lot of times from birds, but also other insects and bats, and so it's not so ridiculous. So let us have this respect for nature. Stop thinking of it as a source of exploitation and of making money, but we should live in harmony. As many of the original dwellers of the earth used to do, so-called First Nation peoples.
Absolutely, very well said. And Akinbode, you currently have an exhibition on in Frankfurt at the Fotografie Forum. I'll just mention that for the benefit of our viewers. It's on until September 12th. We wish you all the best with all of your workshops. And thank you very much for your insights and for relativizing this pandemic situation a bit for us from Europe to Africa, and for this plea to keep the faith in the younger generation and possibly be more creative on a personal level. Much food for thought. Thanks very much for joining me, Akinbode Akinbiyi.